Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's topic, post-processing wildlife photos in black and white, presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Aditya Panda. I'm your host, Rob Mess. Thank you for joining us here today. Over to you, Aditya.
Thank you, Rob, and hello, everyone. I hope you've been having a great week, great start of the week at least. Now, a lot of you had attended my last webinar on the 9th of August, where we spoke about black and white in wildlife photography. And as promised on that webinar, I'm back today with tips on how to post-process pictures in black and white to get fantastic wildlife images. Um, in today's webinar, we shall learn some of the basics of post-processing in black and white. Post-processing wildlife pictures in black and white isn't as simple as just removing the saturation or hitting the convert to black and white button and just letting it be. In color, we go through a lot of different steps, a lot of different features, and sort of use a different eye when post-processing our images. And with black and white, it shall be slightly different because there's one major change in black and white pictures, and that is the absence of color. And we shall be working primarily with light and shadow. So there are some different steps that we need to keep in mind, and a different approach, if you may, for post-processing pictures in black and white. And that is what we shall be learning today. And towards the end of the webinar, or say somewhere about halfway, we shall get into live post-processing a few pictures. And I hope you will find what I teach you today useful and put that to use with your pictures. Before we dive into the webinar, I would like to introduce myself again for those of you who are attending one of my webinars for the first time, and for those of you who haven't traveled with me. My name is Aditya Panda, and I've been leading NatHab expeditions in India since 2016. I lead what we call our Tiger Trips, the Grand India Wildlife Adventure, which takes us to three fantastic national parks across India, and which operates between November through April. And in the summer season in India, that is April through June, I lead two other fantastic tiger-focused expeditions, one of which is called India Tiger Quest, and the other is called the India Tiger Photo Expedition. Both of these expeditions are focused on a single national park in northwestern India called Ranthambore. And while India Tiger Quest is a week-long expedition where we maximize the chances of tiger sighting, India Tiger Photo Expedition is a slightly longer 10-day-long expedition that is a photo pro expedition, photography-focused expedition where there is a lot of element of teaching, you know, things like what we're going to do today through the course of the expedition. When I'm not leading NatHab expeditions, I am based in eastern India, eastern central India, in a state called Orissa, which is my home state, and I involve myself here in the conservation of tiger and elephant landscapes. So let's dive into today's topic. And well, before we dive into today's topic, let me quickly recap what we discussed on our last webinar on this topic. These two webinars might be considered, two parts of the same webinar. So for those of you who might have missed the previous webinar, or for those of you who would just want a recap, here's a quick recap. On our last webinar, we discussed that black and white need not necessarily be a bad idea with wildlife. With wildlife and nature photography, colors do play a very important role. But Black and white also has its place. Um, Animals and birds and plants and skies and water, they all provide amazing opportunities to showcase colors in nature. But in certain circumstances, black and white might actually be preferable, or even might save the day with a picture, with a color picture that is probably not um, well, probably not been shot at its best, or has been shot under conditions of light or time where the picture does not do justice to the sighting or to the view. So black and white can be used in multiple ways in wildlife photography, not only as a savior for what you might call dull um, uh, wildlife pictures or color pictures, but also in certain circumstances with certain species in certain settings, it might actually be better suited than color for wildlife. We learned that high contrast pictures in particular do great with black and white. Pictures that showcase either animals or landscapes that have a lot of patterns and textures in them. Pictures like that thrive in black and white. You can really focus the viewer's attention to those patterns and textures if you want to by removing that film of color and reducing the picture to just lights and shadows. There are a lot of pictures, as we discussed on the last webinar, that might, due to conditions beyond our control, end up being boring or dull, um, or harsh or difficult in terms of light. Pictures shot in the middle of the afternoon, pictures shot under heat haze conditions, pictures shot in very muted or dull light, um, or pictures that are shot with where one just can't seem to get the white balance right. Those pictures do great when turned to black and white. We also learned that sometimes a wildlife picture might have rather dull content. So in those cases, also we learned that turning to black and white might make them more interesting. And also there are situations where pictures suffer photographic imperfections like the noise or like soft focus. In situations like that, black and white or monochrome can really save the day for some pictures. And also, there is also deliberate use of black and white to add mood or drama to certain pictures, because you just somehow seem to convey those emotions in that picture much better in black and white or monochrome than you can do in color. Also, we learned that certain animals, especially animals that are either black or white or black and white or any of the many shades of gray, animals that have beautiful textures on their skin, like elephants, animals that are gray, like hippos or buffalo, or animals, as I was mentioning, that are black and white, like zebras or tigers, they can look really, really good in black and white. There are, you know, the, there are just some species of animals that just look better in a black and white picture than they sometimes do even in color. So that was a quick recap of what we discussed on the last webinar. And as promised, this time we are going to discuss how to post-process our black and white pictures. Now, to start with, when you're shooting a picture, even if you intend to post-process it in black and white, shoot it in the raw format and shoot it in color. You don't have to go into your camera and turn off the color setting and turn it into black and white. Because why do that? Why deny yourself the option of being able to later choose whether you want a picture in color or black and white? And shooting in the raw format is one of the best ways to get a high quality file which has a lot of information in it, which you can post process and play around with dynamic range and really get the best out of it. So don't stop shooting in raw, or if you're shooting with a camera that does not shoot raw, just shoot in the highest JPEG setting that it offers. And to start with, shoot in color, and then later decide how you want to post process it. Sometimes in certain scenes, even while shooting, you might decide that you want this picture in black and white. But even so, it doesn't hurt to shoot it in color to start with, so that you have nothing to lose later. Even when you post process, I would recommend that even if you're post processing a picture that you have always intended to post process in black and white, play around with it. Duplicate it on Lightroom or whatever software that you use to post process your pictures, and do one version in color, the other version in black and white. Look at both of them, see how they feel, see what the look and feel of those pictures is at first glance. Show it to your friends, your family. Show the two pictures differently. Ask them to pick which is better. And often um, having a second or third perspective really helps, because we tend to be blind to our own work. We tend to have preconceived ideas of how we want a picture to be, and tend to, uh, you know, just like what we produce because we have produced it. So I would suggest that when you post process your pictures, do it both in color and black and white, so that you can really understand that picture, really see what works better in what conditions. If you post process a picture in color, you might decide that you actually like it better in color, or you might decide that in color you see certain details that you do not in black and white, and those details might be unwanted or unpleasant or distractive, and that therefore you prefer the black and white version of it. So play around with both, and then decide, then take a call. Another thing that I have started doing a bit myself, and something that I recommend to my guests uh, a lot these days, is to play around with presets. The presets in softwares like Lightroom have started getting really, really good, and a lot of them are even AI assisted, and they are super good to, even for pro photographers like us, like myself. Um, we like to sometimes play around with presets before we start working on a picture, just to get started in a particular direction. Um, Play around with the presets, see if something, if you like the look of something at first glance. If you like the look of something at first glance, that's a pretty good indicator that that's a great way to go with a particular picture. And you can select that preset and then go into the finer editing panel and see if you want to tweak um, with the settings a bit, and get your perfection achieved. But presets really help not only shorten the amount of time that we spend editing our pictures by a massive amount, but presets also help us in finding uh, uh, a direction in which to take our post processing in. So do that, play around with presets. And with black and white pictures, I really love playing with the texture and clarity sliders on Lightroom. I wouldn't do that a lot of times on color pictures, but in black and white, I really enjoy doing that because these sliders bring out details that would otherwise just look like noise or distortion in a color picture, or just look like artifacts on a color picture. But once in black and white, those details look really, really nice. And yeah, black and white doesn't really have to be black and white. As I was mentioning in our previous webinar on this topic, there is a difference between black and white and monochrome. The photography community sort of tends to use both these terms interchangeably. But if you go into if you interact with someone from the designing community or the artistic community, there is a pretty clear distinction between monochrome and black and white. Black and white photography is a kind of monochrome photography, while monochrome photography does not necessarily have to be just black and white. You can have a certain color, a single color. It could just be, red, or like in this picture, just a warm sepia tinge or cast that really gives a lot of feel to a picture, a particular feel or a particular look to the picture. So do play around with color casts, and I'll show you how to do that today when we are live editing pictures. Do play with color casts. Don't just necessarily limit yourself to black and white. And with color pictures, we usually generally tend to consider noise, camera noise, as our enemy, digital noise, that is. But with black and white, noise is not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of black and white photographers actually like some amount of noise, or as I'll show you later in post processing, they can actually deliberately add some amount of noise to give that grainy sort of vintage film look. And in black and white photography, noise can actually look pretty nice. So don't be obsessed with removing noise absolutely from your black and white pictures. And most importantly, when you produce these beautiful pictures, when you work on these beautiful pictures, after all that effort, put in the effort to actually print your pictures, frame them, put them on a wall. Nothing, nothing makes a picture look as good as having it printed, preferably a large size, and mounted and framed and put on a wall. No screen, no matter how good, can give you that look. In this digital world, we tend to shoot tons and tons and tons of pictures, and I know because I'm guilty of this myself. And then we always look at them on a screen. We rarely, if ever, print them. Uh, it used to be a necessity to print them back in the film days, because you had to take your film to a print shop and get them to develop your film and print it in postcard size or 8 by 10s, and you had to get them home. But with digital, people are increasingly not doing that, thanks to screens taking over our lives, be it in our phones or our laptops or our TVs, and when not. But do print your pictures, print them large. A print will also tell you, how well you've actually post processed your picture. And once you print it, your the details that you see in print, especially on a large print, they're absolutely unmatched by any screen. So do go out and print your pictures. Maybe we'll do a webinar sometime on how to post process your pictures for printing and how to print your pictures. So, having said that, let's get into Lightroom and start post processing. Just give me a second to get out of my presentation and get into Lightroom. I have selected 5 pictures. Let's see if we have time for all 5. Just the computer has become a little slow. So just give me a little time for the pictures to load. So here we have 5 pictures. There is a really old picture that I've taken. This was in 2013, shot with the Pentax K5 DSLR, 16 megapixels, and um, a 90 millimeter macro lens that I had used to take a picture of this young bull elephant that was standing pretty close to where I was parked at a place called Corbett National Park. So this will be our first picture. Um, Next, we have a picture of a fishing cat. I'll turn off the shadow warning so that you can actually see the picture. This is an animal called the fishing cat, which, as its name suggests, is a cat that specializes in fishing. It lives in swampy, riparian, marshy areas, and here it is in a mangrove forest in off the east coast of India. And this picture has been taken at night. And if I zoom in on it, you'll see that it has a lot of noise, and it's been shot using the light from a flashlight, a handheld flashlight. So not the best conditions of lighting, I must say, but let's see what we can do with it. And here is a picture of a tigress and her cub taken earlier this year on our India Tiger photo expedition. And this is a beautiful picture of a tigress and her cub in good light and by daylight. So it should be a fairly easy picture to work on. And here is a picture of a sambar deer, which is sharp, which is in focus, but which is dull. So I just found this picture dull, but it's got a good subject and very so-so lighting. And I'm hoping that by converting it to black and white, I might actually be able to make it look better. And here is a picture of a sloth bear shot on an India Tiger Quest trip. And this was later in the afternoon, but here we have a black subject. So it should be interesting to see how it looks in black and white, and we'll see how we can post process that. So let's start with the elephant. Now, this picture was shot at ISO 800, and I'm pretty impressed with how a camera that old and with a sensor that is quite primitive compared to today's cameras could shoot such clean images at ISO 800 that you actually don't even need to use any noise reduction on this. So let's start with it. Let's start by checking the composition, and I really wouldn't do much to crop this picture because this is a full frame picture, and there's almost nothing I would change. The elephant fills the frame pretty nicely. It is placed pretty pleasantly in the rule of thirds lines, and I will not crop this picture. What I do find a little intrusive to the eye is this horizon line that seems to cut through the elephant, and which right now in color is quite visible and sort of stands out. And I don't like how it cuts through the animal. I either want the horizon above my animal or below it and not cutting through it. So let's see what we can do with this picture. I mean, even in color, this is a very nice picture. We have beautiful low angle light on the, lighting up one side of the elephant, and everything looks beautiful. I have in fact worked on this picture in color, and I quite like the result. But I think it looks even better in black and white. So to start with, I'm gonna just click this one button here in the edit panel called BMW. So there you go. Our elephant is suddenly now without any colors. Now you see the exposure is a little on the higher side. So I'm gonna pull down the exposure a bit to uh, uh, make it a little more natural. uh, minus zero point 0.7. And you see, as soon as I pull down the exposure, you start to see these hill ranges, these mountain ranges in the back, the foothills of the Himalaya that were otherwise not visible. See, when the exposure was not corrected, those hill ranges were not visible. So it'll be pretty nice to see those hill ranges in our picture. So we'll do something about that. Now, with the exposure corrected, let's fix contrast. Let's add some contrast. Adding some contrast is uh, maybe about that much. Now I'm going to pull down the highlights to bring those mountains in the background a little more into prominence. And there you can already see them better. You can see layers of mountains in the back. And I'm going to see if I can pull up the shadows to lighten up the elephant a bit, or if pulling down the shadows is going to bring the mountains more into prominence. You see, pulling down the shadows does bring the mountains into prominence, but it does not help with my elephant. My elephant is now very dark. So I'm going to pull up the shadows a bit to brighten up my elephant. But if you remember what I taught in my past webinars on post-processing, there's something else we can do. We can pull up the shadows on the elephant while pulling them down on the background. So I'm going to select an object mask, and I did a webinar specially on masking for those of you who are interested, and draw a rectangle on the elephant and let AI do the rest. It's gonna hopefully choose the elephant, and then I can do some fine adjustments. There, it's chosen the elephant. And what I'm going to do now is pull up the shadows on the elephant a bit, say by 24 or maybe 30 points. And now I'll go back and pull down the shadows on the overall picture a bit so that the mountains come into prominence and the elephant is still correctly exposed. If you noticed, I actually overdid the shadows a bit, pulling up the shadows a bit when I did it on the elephant. All right, now we go to the whites and blacks and finish off our uh, light adjustments. There, about that much. See, when I pull down the blacks too much, there is this blue patch coming up under the elephant, which shows that I'm clipping the blacks. So I'll not pull it down all the way beyond 40, minus 40, but say I'll keep it just at about 33, minus 33. Now, with our light adjustments done, well, maybe not 33, maybe a little less. Yeah, about 18. Now, with our light adjustments done, we see that the elephant is fairly well exposed, and the horizon line at the end of the grassland is suddenly not as prominent at all. It doesn't seem as intrusive as it did in color. In black and white, that distinction is gone because the color of the grass and the color of the mountain here are now closer to each other, and you don't see a distinct difference between the two of them. So there, just by converting this picture to black and white, I've managed to get rid of that problem. Now, what I want still is a little more detail in these mountains here in the back. And to do that, I'm going to go back into masks, and I'm going to create a new mask, and I'll choose sky. Let's see if it chooses the mountains along with the sky or just the sky. If that doesn't work, we can just use a linear gradient to select the mountains and bring down their exposure a bit and bring some detail in them. Well, I think it's done a pretty good job, but I don't like how it sort of intrudes into the elephant a bit here on the left side, but doesn't on the right side. So what I'm going to do is I could use a brush to fine tune this, but that's going to take some time. So I am going to delete mask 2 and create a new mask and choose linear gradient, which is much simpler. And there you go. Here we have a linear gradient, and all we need to do is to bring down the exposure a bit on that. Not too much, but yeah, there you go. Now you have the elephant perfectly exposed and the mountain in the background too. So let's get back into our editing panel. We don't need to do anything with color here. With white balance, it doesn't matter, it's a black and white picture. But here's something that you can do with a black and white picture in this panel called the black and white mixer. Now you might be wondering why these colors are mentioned here in the black and white mixer, because this is supposed to be a black and white picture. You don't see any colors, so how does it matter? Now, what this does is it actually adjusts the luminance of the individual colors in the picture. So, say for example, this grass is green. What happens when I pull down the green slider? You see, it begins to darken the grass. And if I pull it up, it begins to brighten the grass. So that's just something to know. It's not something that we are going to use in this picture, but it's just a feature to know. So similarly, in a tiger picture, for example, if I pull down the yellow slider, then the yellow colored bits of the tiger would become darker. And if I pulled it up, those would become brighter, because these sliders here, they control the luminance of certain colors, not the saturation. Now, if I wanted to color grade this picture, if I wanted to add, oops, sorry, yeah. If I wanted to add a color cast, like I was mentioning earlier, I could just do this. I could hold this. So you can control the color cast using, by controlling the color of the midtones, the highlights, and the shadows. What happens if I play around with the shadows is that the color cast in the darker parts of the picture get controlled. While if I play around with the highlights, then the color cast in the brighter parts of the picture, like here, like here, like here, will get altered. And the midtones sort of are self-explanatory. They control the middle tones or the medium tones, and that's usually where I start with if I'm playing around with it. So if I just play around with this a little, you see now it gets, I pull it towards the orangish side, looks, it gets that sepia tint, like an old picture. And if I pull it the opposite way, it gives a sort of bluish magenta tint to it. And here it gets a greenish tint. Now, in the case of this picture, I am not going to use that, although you are free to play around with these and see what works for a particular picture, because some pictures might actually look better with a tint. Now, texture and clarity again. Um, as I was mentioning, texture and clarity work really well with black and white pictures or monochrome pictures. So if I add some texture to this image, you see um, the details at the edges come out quite well. But I don't want to add so much texture, and I might not even want texture everywhere on the frame. I might just want it on the elephant, because these lovely um, patterns on the skin of the elephant's trunk and the veins in his ears, the cuts and tears here, they might look really well with some enhanced texture. So would these bits of dirt that the elephant has left on his forehead after a dust bath. So I'm going to go back into my masks, select mask one, which is our elephant, and then go down looking for texture and add just a little bit of texture and clarity. I might even add a bit of sharpness, but I don't think it's necessary in this picture. So back to the editing panel, and should we add some vignetting? Let's see, a little bit maybe, yeah, about 13 points. Uh, the vignetting sort of frames the elephant, draws your attention to the subject, and in this case, it highlights the mountains in the background even more. So always welcome. And now I shall finish off by adding some sharpness. And every time when I add sharpening, I reduce my sharpening radius to the minimum possible. And this picture does not really need to be denoised, so I'm not gonna use it, and besides it's going to take a lot of time to do that, so I'll just ignore it for now. And as usual, I will finish off by selecting these optical corrections that are automatic. So I shall remove chromatic aberration and enable lens corrections. So with lens corrections, the lens profile is already fed into Lightroom, so it knows exactly how much distortion to correct. So here we have our elephant. I'll just go into full screen once to give you a better look, and this is what it looks like now. And this is what it looked like earlier. Before and after. Before and after. That's the before. My computer is slowing down a bit with everything that's going on. So once again, before and after. So that sort of took care of most of the basic uh, things that we need to know about black and white post processing. Now I'm going to be a little quicker and less deliberate with the other pictures. Here we have a fishing cat, and I'm going to turn off the the shadow or black warning. Um, let's see if it needs cropping. I like the way in which the tree here frames the cat. It's a pretty small cat, but for a small cat, it's a pretty large cat, if you know what I mean. It's a big, small cat. Right, it's cropped. Now let's convert it to black and white. There you go. I'll reduce the exposure a little bit. Add some contrast. The contrast sort of makes the background a little darker, which adds to that mystery of the night feeling. I'll pull down highlights a bit to control the overexposed bits where the flashlight is shining, and to get some details out of the white parts of the pictures. What do we do with shadows? Do we add more shadows? Yeah, I think we should add some shadows. Just give a hint of what's going on in the background while focusing focusing our attention on our little big cat. Now I'm going to pull up the whites a bit and see how far I can go without blowing out the details. What that much is fine. And the blacks I think are doing fine. Now here's an example for you to see what these color sliders do in the black and white mixer. So let's see orange. Now the cat's head, if you see this part is brown, and so is the uh, rest of the top of the cat. Its chest is white, but the rest of it is brown, brownish, grayish brown. So let's pull down the orange slider a bit. Doesn't seem to make much of a difference. There's very little orange on our cat. Um, the yellow slider certainly seems to, the luminance in the yellow certainly seems to have an effect, but I don't think it will make much of a difference. Again, I'm going to add some texture on our cat. Takes forever, yeah, but does a good job. And some clarity. maybe some vignetting. The vignetting definitely helps with controlling some of the peripheral light and draw our attention onto the cat. And then my standard sharpness, overall sharpness values, and the optical corrections. So here, let me get into full screen again. And there's our fishing cat um, with a lot less noise and artifacts, and much more attention to the subject, um, in a much more pleasant picture when you convert it to black and white. For some reason, when I press the before and after shortcut, which is the backslash, um, the in full screen, it keeps switching between the original and the edit. So here you have the after, and that's how it looked like before. Now, I realize we are running tight on time. So before I work on the tiger or the sloth bear, I'm actually going to show you this samba deer. And the reason behind that is that, get this back. The reason behind that is I wanted to explain the ability of black and white to turn a dull picture into a far less dull picture, if not an interesting picture, almost instantaneously. Now here we have a samba deer, as I was mentioning, in you know very very uh, boring sort of light. There's absolutely nothing interesting about the light. The picture does not have a really interesting subject either. I mean, it does have the deer, but you can only see half of it. The while it was being captured, the bottom half of it has been cut out of the frame, and it's just a close up of the face of the samba, which is the most interesting thing in this entire picture. Um, Now, when we look at this picture, um, you know, we want our viewers' attention to go to the only interesting thing in this picture, which is the sambar's face. But there is a lot of distraction. Here, the belly of the sambar has been lit up by sunlight, and you can see the yellow there. And our eyes tend to go to the brightest, most colorful part of a picture first. So we don't want this to be the most attractive part of the picture. We don't want our viewers to be looking at this first and then this, and then noticing that the light is pretty off, and it has a strange sort of color cast. Look how that changes the moment I turn it into a black and white picture. See how instantaneously, just by turning it into a monochrome picture, by even before I start doing any other edits, just by turning it into a monochrome picture, it has become a far more interesting picture, where our eyes are now getting drawn to the sambar's face first. You can see how dark her eyes are. You can see the hair on her neck, the shape of her ears, and suddenly all of this here in the all the distractions in the rest of the picture are irrelevant. Our face, our eyes are drawn to her nose, her eyes, her ears, the sambar's face. So let's start making it a little better. The exposure seems fine to me. I'm going to add some contrast to uh, pull out those details even more. Um, say about 36 points of contrast. Uh, what shall we do with the highlights? Should we pull them down? Maybe not. I like the highlights on her face. Um, let's see what happens if we add some highlights. It becomes too bright. Let's leave the highlights at 0. I'll play around with the shadows a bit. Yeah, maybe pull down the shadows a bit, not too much. Um, pull up the whites, not too much again. The warnings are coming up, about 9 points. And pull down the blacks to make those beautiful dark eyes stand out a bit more. About that much. Now in this picture, I can add texture and clarity without using the uh, subject masks. It's not necessary because there's very little other than the subject in this. Add some texture, 21 points of texture, a little bit of clarity, and some vignetting, not much. Does it actually look better without vignetting? No, we'll add some vignetting. And sharpening, 0, 0.5 radius, and lens corrections. So you see, black and white post-processing is actually not all that time taking, and it makes a massive difference. Here, have a look at the full screen picture. This is how our Sambar looked in the beginning, uninteresting with an ugly blue cast, uneven lighting, and a very passable picture. But the moment we convert it into black and white, that's how it looks. So much better. Now I see we have 5 minutes left. Let's quickly work on the tiger. Or maybe let's work on the bear because it's a more interesting picture in from a post processing point of view because it's black and white. I'm going to quickly uh, crop it a bit to get the composition right. Um, Black and white looks better already. Um, I'll pull down the uh, exposure a bit to get all the bright background a little in view, add some contrast. Pull down highlights a bit, pull up shadows a bit to get some details out of our sloth bear. Quick adjustment of blacks and whites. Ignore the white balance again. I'll ignore the uh, color grading here. Maybe it might look good with a little bit of a sepia. Yeah, a little bit of sepia on our bear. Add some texture, brings out the details even better. Clarity. And I'm going to add some vignetting. Maybe I overdid the texture and clarity a bit. Let's see. Yes, I did. Now what I'm going to do is I'll bring up my blacks a bit. And here we add sharpening, bring down the radius, enable lens corrections, and here we have our sloth bear suddenly looking much better. And you see how turning it into black and white has brought all this dust on its fur into prominence, and you know to have a black and white, a black subject or a white subject in monochrome really highlights the subject while taking all the distractions away and drawing our attention to the subject. Let's do a quick before and after, and then we shall switch into a question and answer because I don't think we have time to work on yet another picture. So here is how it looked before, and here is how it looks now. So yeah, with that, I think we need to uh, call it a day and get back into our presentation and hear what questions you have for us. So, Rob, over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Aditya. Now, before we start in with the question and answer session, I would like to remind everyone that you can submit your questions via the question field in your GoToWebinar control panel. And if you are interested in traveling with NatHab, you can visit our website at nathab.com for trip details or call us at 800 543 8917 to speak with an adventure specialist. All right, let's dive into these questions. So, can you talk about the comparison of working with JPEG versus RAW? Is one easier than the other? Is there something that we should be doing specifically with one or the other?
Sure. Um, JPEG is definitely easier because when you're shooting JPEG, literally letting the camera do all the post processing for you by using standard average values. And when you shoot with JPEG, you actually end up with a much smaller file with far fewer details in it than when you shoot a picture in the RAW format. In the RAW format, the camera literally gives you a raw file with all the raw information that it captured just as the light hit the sensor, and it leaves you to do the fine tuning later on your computer. But when you shoot JPEG, the camera does the crude tuning. There's no fine tuning there. It does a bit of crude tuning within the camera to give you a file that's ready to post, a file that you can instantly post on Instagram or send to the print shop. But because that file has been tuned by using crude average values that have been fed into the camera's processor, those are standard values. They might work for some pictures, they might not work for other pictures, and they'll definitely never give you the amount of control and quality that a raw file will.
Great. Thank you for addressing that. So, can you tell us what you mean by noise? Maybe give us some examples of what that means.
Well, noise basically refers to the grain or the grainy effect that you see in a picture sometimes, especially if it's shot under low light conditions or shot at a very high ISO in your camera. And you might notice this even on your smartphone. When you take a picture in very low light and you zoom in on it, it appears grainy and textured rather than appearing smooth and clean. So that grain is known as noise. It's just digital noise. It's your camera sensor is full of pixels, and under certain conditions, some of those pixels might appear sort of uh, oversaturated or over contrasty or garish, basically. So this is a common problem when shooting in low light using high ISOs. But what I was referring to in the context of today's webinar is that noise might actually not be that unpleasant when you convert a picture into black and white.
Gotcha. Thank you. So, if I am planning to make a photo black and white, are there things that you recommend that we should do when taking the photo to maximize that goal?
Well, um, you know, a lot of times that decision is taken after shooting the picture. But if you choose to, if when you want to shoot a picture with the intention of creating a black and white image, then what you can do is that you pay a lot more attention to light and shadows. Um, Ignore colors when you're looking through the viewfinder. Make sure that your lighting is great. Your subject is not in a situation where its face or eyes are in the shadow, and just pay a lot more attention to exposure and light and shadow. Those of you who are shooting with modern mirrorless cameras, you actually have an option to turn your electronic viewfinder into monochrome or black and white. So when you're looking at a scene, um, you will be looking at a viewfinder that shows you the scene itself in black and white. So that makes it even easier for you to see what that particular scene looks like in black and white, so that you have a much nicer idea of the finished image that you will get out of it. But the file that is recorded onto your memory card in the camera is going to be a color raw format file. So should you change your mind, you still have the raw file.
That is so good to know. Thank you, Aditya. So I've got a couple of guests who are a little worried about complying with some standard or some norm when editing the pictures. Is it okay to just adjust our pictures to our own personal tastes?
Absolutely. That is the whole point of it. But, as photographers, we are all individual artists, and the purpose of our photography ultimately is to convey what we saw and felt when we took a particular picture and how we want to display it to the rest of the world. But just to understand some of the finer technicalities of it and to keep those points in mind is really helpful in producing an end result that is technically sound and just a pleasant high quality file.
Great. Thank you. Well, unfortunately, Aditya, that will be the last question that we do have time for today. So I'd like to hand it back to you for your closing comments.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you to our wonderful audience. I hope you found today's webinar useful, and I hope it'll encourage you to try out new things when post processing your pictures the next time. And thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar. I look forward to seeing you all soon again.
And thank you so much for taking the time to present for us today, Aditya. And I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in. So if you are interested in information on how you can travel with NatHab, please give us a call at the number on your screen or send us an email at info@nathab.com. Join us tomorrow for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next time.